They called him Earthshaker. His temper could crack mountains. His trident could call forth storms that swallowed empires whole. Yet deep beneath the rage, beneath the echoing thunder of waves, there was a truth no him dared to sing. Poseidon, lord of the sea, once feared the ocean itself. Before the foam crowned his brow and the coral halls of Aigai gleamed in his name, he was only a child, swallowed whole by his father, imprisoned in the dark. There, in a stomach made of stone and time, he heard something vast breathing in the distance. It wasn't Kronos. It wasn't death. It was the ocean, alive, waiting, whispering promises of eternity and vengeance. This is not the story of a god who ruled easily. It is the tale of a being torn between love and fury, control and surrender. The ocean would become both his kingdom and his reflection, boundless, powerful, yet restless. And through his eyes, we glimpse the ancient balance between creation and destruction, between the calm surface and the storm below. So close your eyes. Hear the quiet hum beneath the surface. Tonight we drift into the deep, where gods are born, and the sea remembers everything. In the age before ages, when the world was still raw and the stars hung low like molten drops of fire, the Titan Kronos ruled all. He devoured his children whole, fearing the prophecy that one of them would rise to overthrow him. Within his vast body, a prison of living rock and darkness, the swallowed gods drifted like forgotten stars. Among them was Poseidon. His essence flickered like a heartbeat, soft, uncertain, waiting. The air, if such a thing existed in that inner world, was heavy with despair. He could not see his siblings, but he could feel them, faint pulses of existence trembling through the abyss. Hestia's warmth, Demeter's patience, Hera's quiet rage, and somewhere, far off, the echo of a thunder that would one day be called Zeus. Time lost meaning there, moments stretched into eternities. Yet even in that timeless void, something stirred. Poseidon began to sense movement, the flow of invisible currents, swirling in patterns he could not understand. Perhaps it was the blood of the Titan flowing around him, or perhaps it was something older, something that pulsed with rhythm, like waves against unseen shores. He began to dream of water, not the gentle streams mortals would one day know, but an endless expanse of living darkness. It spoke to him without words. It called him child, though it was older than any god. And from that dream, fear was born, fear of being consumed, fear of never surfacing again. That fear would shape his power forever. Then came Rhea, mother of gods and keeper of defiance. When she bore her youngest child, Zeus, she hid him from Kronos and offered the Titan a stone wrapped in swaddling cloth instead. Zeus grew in secret, his rage maturing like a storm in silence. When he returned, he struck, forcing Kronos to vomit forth his devoured children. The world shook. From the Titan's mouth poured rivers of divine light, and with them, Poseidon. He emerged gasping, reborn into chaos, coated in the dust of eternity. His first breath was the roar of thunder rolling across creation. His second was a scream, not of pain, but of freedom. Light, sound, motion. After eternity in stillness, these sensations were almost unbearable. He collapsed to his knees upon the newborn earth, trembling as the wind licked his face. The taste of air was sharp and cold. The ground beneath him trembled with something familiar. Movement, vibration, a rhythm. It reminded him of the dream, of the dark water calling his name. He looked up to see his brothers and sisters emerging beside him, blinking at the newborn sun. They were gods now, though they did not yet understand what that meant. Zeus stood taller than the rest, lightning dancing faintly in his eyes. Hades gazed downward, silent and thoughtful, as if he already saw the underworld beneath his feet. Poseidon said nothing. He listened. Far beyond the horizon, beyond the hills and clouds, there came a faint murmur, a sigh from the unseen sea. It was as though the ocean itself had been waiting for him to be born, and somewhere inside he felt it answer. When the gods rallied under Zeus to make war against the Titans, Poseidon's heart was already claimed by that distant voice. He fought not for vengeance, but for release, for the rhythm that had cradled him even in the belly of a monster. But the sea is a jealous thing. It never frees what it loves. The wind shifted. He turned his head toward the west, where the invisible waters waited. The surface of the world shimmered as though it were breathing. He did not yet know it, but that shimmer was his destiny, his crown, his burden, his eternal home. In the silence that followed the god's first victory cry, Poseidon whispered one word to himself, barely audible over the wind. Soon. Was it a promise? A warning? Or a prayer? Even the sea would not answer. Not yet. The newborn world was still trembling after the fall of the Titans. Mountains were raw scars upon the earth. Rivers ran in directions they would later forget. The gods, freed from Kronos' stomach, scattered across creation, disoriented, powerful, and afraid of what they had become. Poseidon stumbled through the wilderness, still shaking from his rebirth. The air itself seemed too thin to contain him. When he touched the ground, the soil quivered. When he exhaled, mist rose, faint traces of ocean vapor, though no sea yet existed. He did not know it, but the water was already answering his pulse. Zeus had vanished into the clouds, seeking to gather allies among the stars. Hades walked into shadow, following the voices that whispered from beneath the earth. Poseidon, left alone, wandered west, drawn by an instinct he couldn't name. Hours? Days? Time meant nothing to a god newly born. The sun bled across the horizon, and he walked until the land itself seemed to end. There, at the edge of the world, he found it, the first cave, carved not by hand but by divine accident. The stone walls breathed cold air that smelled of salt and metal, and faintly, deep within, came the gentle bleating of a goat. Her name was Amalthea, the divine nurturer who had once fed Zeus in secret. Her horns shimmered faintly, each curve marked by constellations yet unnamed. Her eyes glowed with the patience of eternity. When Poseidon stepped forward, the creature did not flee. Instead, she approached and bowed her head. From her udder flowed milk not white but silver, thick with divine energy. It pooled at his feet, forming tiny ripples that glowed against the stone floor. He drank, and as he did, memories returned. Flashes of the void, the dream of the ocean calling his name. The milk filled his veins with the rhythm of tides. His heart began to beat not as flesh, but as current, surging, withdrawing, returning. For the first time, he felt strength without rage. Outside the cave, the sky cracked open. Lightning split the clouds, echoing Zeus's distant war cry. The rebellion against Kronos had begun. Poseidon could feel it vibrating through the earth. But here, in this hidden cave, time stood still. Amalthea watched him with knowing calm. "You feed a storm," said a voice. Poseidon turned. In the flickering light of the cave's entrance stood a woman woven of mist, a sea nymph, one of the ancient daughters of Oceanus. Her hair flowed like currents. Her eyes reflected infinite depth. She did not name herself, but Poseidon would later know her kind as the Nereids, spirits of the deep. "The ocean has chosen you," she whispered. "It sings your name beneath the horizon." He frowned. "But there is no sea." "There will be." Her voice was neither promise nor prophecy, only truth, spoken as gently as a wave breaking on sand. Then she faded, dissolving into droplets that shimmered against the stone before vanishing. Alone again, Poseidon stepped to the mouth of the cave. Beyond the cliffs lay the unfinished world, vast plains and jagged mountains, but no water large enough to quench the horizon. And yet, as he stood there, the air trembled. A faint vibration hummed beneath his feet, deep and slow, like the heartbeat of something sleeping far below. He knelt, pressing his hand to the ground. The stone was cold, but within it pulsed warmth, not from fire, but from motion. He felt it moving beneath everything, whispering upward. The voice from his dreams returned, faint but clear. "Come find me." He drew his hand back, startled. Amalthea let out a gentle bleat behind him, as if urging him toward his destiny. For days he remained in the cave, growing in strength. He learned the language of echoes, how sound carried through stone the way current carried through water. He meditated beside silver pools that formed wherever Amalthea's milk spilled. When he struck the ground in frustration, droplets flew upward, hovering in the air before falling again. He watched them with fascination, the first waves, though he did not yet know it. Sometimes the voice in the depths spoke again, never fully heard, only felt. It was patient, ancient, endless. He began to understand that it was not merely calling him, but shaping him. Every breath he took aligned with its rhythm. Every heartbeat matched its pull. The ocean was building its god from within the clay of his spirit. Then, one night, while the stars wheeled overhead, Amalthea began to fade. Her light dimmed, her body dissolving into luminous dust. Poseidon rushed to her side, grief cutting through his immortal calm. "Why?" he whispered. She nuzzled his hand, eyes soft. "The world does not keep its guardians forever," she seemed to say without words. "You are ready." And then she was gone, leaving only her horn, golden, glowing faintly, filled with infinite sustenance. It would later be called the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, a symbol of divine abundance. Poseidon lifted it and felt its power, a reminder that nourishment and destruction were siblings, as inseparable as wave and undertow. He stepped from the cave and looked out upon the dark horizon. Far away, he could see Zeus's lightning splitting the sky, a storm of war and destiny. He tightened his grip on the horn, then raised his hand. The air thickened. The first wind of the ocean's future stirred, brushing his hair like a whisper. For a moment, he thought he heard the laughter of the sea nymph again, distant and sweet. "Follow the current," her voice seemed to say. "Find your depth." Poseidon turned toward the west once more, always west, where the sun fell into nothingness. He did not yet know that beneath that falling light waited his true realm, sleeping in blue darkness, waiting to be born from his fury and his grace. He took one last look at the cave that had sheltered him, the place of milk, echoes, and transformation. Then he whispered a vow, low and resonant. "I will return when the earth trembles for me." As he walked away, the cave sealed behind him, stone folding over stone like closing eyelids. The wind quieted. The silence that followed was heavy, sacred, and eternal. From the shadows of Olympus to the edges of creation, the name of Poseidon began to spread, whispered not by mortals, but by the elements themselves. The sea was not yet born, but its god already walked the earth. And somewhere deep below, the ocean turned in its sleep. Was it dreaming of him, or was he dreaming of it? The sky burned, not with fire, but with gods being born into rage. The Titanomachy had begun, a war that would decide who ruled existence itself. The sons and daughters of Kronos had risen from the ruins of their father's tyranny, armed with weapons forged from the bones of chaos. The earth split, mountains bled light, and at the heart of it all stood Poseidon, his hands trembling around the newly forged trident, a weapon that was not made, but summoned. When he had touched it for the first time, lightning had burst through his veins. The trident was crafted by the Cyclopes, those one-eyed smiths who hammered galaxies into shape. It was said that each of its 3 points represented what the gods could not control: storm, quake, and sea. But Poseidon's dominion did not yet exist. The ocean was still only a whisper under the ground, a pulse waiting to surface. His weapon was a prophecy of what would be, not what was. He marched beside Zeus and Hades, the 3 brothers whose names would become law. The wind howled through the shattered valleys of creation, carrying the scent of iron and ozone. Lightning lashed above, and the rivers boiled below. From the east came the Titans, colossal beings of endless endurance. From the west came the gods, shining and furious, like dawn breaking through eternal night. Poseidon struck the ground, and the world answered. The first earthquake tore through the battlefield. Titans stumbled as the land beneath them heaved like a living thing. Boulders the size of temples rolled. Mountains folded inward. The younger gods cheered, and Poseidon felt something bloom within him. Not joy, not pride, power, the kind that tempts, the kind that corrupts. Zeus hurled bolts that split the heavens. Hades summoned shadows that swallowed whole legions. But it was Poseidon who broke the field itself. When he raised his trident high, storm clouds gathered. Though there was no sea to draw from, no ocean yet to lend its weight. He pulled moisture from the air, wringing the world dry, shaping it into torrents that fell like molten glass upon their enemies. The Titans screamed. Their cries became thunder. Their blood became rivers. Every impact shook the cosmos. And yet, through all the violence, Poseidon's mind drifted back to the voice from the cave, the one that had whispered from the deep, "Come find me." Each time he swung his trident, the ground quaked. Each time he struck, he felt the earth hollowing beneath him, as though something below was answering his rage, expanding, waiting to be filled. "Brother," Zeus called above the storm, "the earth moves with your anger. Steady it." But Poseidon could not. His fury was unchained. He saw the Titans not as enemies but as reflections, beings born of chaos, fighting to survive in a world too small for them. And yet, when his weapon met their flesh, the sky itself seemed to bow. Across the field, the Titan Oceanus rose, towering above the others. His body shimmered like liquid bronze, his beard a cascade of rivers. He looked upon Poseidon not with hatred, but with recognition. "Child of the storm," Oceanus thundered, "you wield what is mine." Poseidon glared back. "Then take it from me." Their powers collided, not water against water, but existence against potential. For the first time, the young god felt the ocean's true force press against him. It wasn't anger, it was infinity. The waves of energy drowned his senses. He staggered back, clutching his chest as his heart matched the pulse of the deep. Oceanus smiled, almost kindly. "When the war ends, seek me beneath the horizon. There you will find your kingdom and your curse." The Titan vanished into mist, leaving Poseidon gasping on shattered stone. Zeus landed beside him, lightning still sparking from his arms. "Are you hurt?" "No," Poseidon said, though his voice trembled. "Only awakened." The war raged for 10 years. The land burned, the sky fractured, and the underworld cracked open like a wound. For every victory, a mountain fell. For every loss, a new god was born. Mortals did not yet exist, but the echoes of their future prayers were already being shaped by this chaos. Poseidon fought not for conquest, but for release. He learned to control his earthquakes, to summon tremors as warnings, not weapons. He struck the ground, and where the earth split, springs burst forth, early hints of the seas that would one day fill the world. At last, Zeus called for the final assault. The brothers descended upon Kronos himself, the devourer, the father, the tyrant of time. His body was made of stone and storm, his eyes twin furnaces of hatred. When Poseidon faced him, he felt that old fear rise again, the memory of being swallowed, of endless darkness. But this time he did not cower. He lifted the trident and whispered to the voice that had followed him all his life. "If you are the sea," he said, "rise with me now." The ground convulsed. From the fractures in the earth, water erupted, torrents of silver light, cascading upward in spirals. The first true ocean was born in that instant, carved not by time but by defiance. The waves struck Kronos like living hands, pulling him downward as Zeus unleashed thunder and Hades opened the earth beneath his feet. The Titan roared, a sound that became the quake of all future storms. His fall was the first cataclysm, and his body became the foundation of the world. Mountains were his bones, valleys his wounds, rivers his veins. When the silence finally came, Poseidon stood trembling. His trident glowed faintly, wet with creation. All around him, the newborn seas shimmered vast, endless, waiting. Zeus turned to him, eyes bright with awe. "Brother," he said softly, "you have given the world its heart." Poseidon looked out across the horizon. The ocean rippled back at him, vast and new, mirroring his face in 1,000 fragments. For the first time he smiled, not with triumph but with understanding. The sea was not a weapon. It was memory, but even as he watched it spread, he knew what Oceanus had meant. This gift was not only a kingdom, it was a bond. The sea would love him, but never let him rest. He whispered again to the horizon, "Then let it be so." The waves answered with their first thunderous applause, and in that moment the god of the sea was born. Yet beyond the calm surface, something still stirred, an ancient hunger, older than the Titans, waiting in the abyss below. What awakens when even the gods create oceans from their rage? The war ended not with victory's shout, but with silence. A silence so vast it frightened even the gods. 10 years of thunder and flame had broken the sky, and now only smoke rose where Titans once stood. The air still smelled of burnt time. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, stood amid the ruins of their father's reign, staring at the empty throne of Kronos. They had won, but what did winning mean in a world newly wounded? Lightning flickered above. Ash drifted like snow. The gods of rebellion had become rulers of creation, and creation waited for command. Poseidon felt the sea behind him, still raw from birth. It whispered with restless energy, testing its boundaries like a wild creature newly freed. He could feel it tugging at him, asking for purpose, for rule. But before he could answer, Zeus spoke. "The world cannot stand without order," said the Sky Lord, his voice echoing like distant thunder. "Let us divide it, each to his dominion." No one argued. They knew this had always been the end. But as Zeus lifted 3 stones, ancient and glowing, something in Poseidon's chest tightened. The brothers cast lots. The first stone burned with the hue of dawn. When Zeus drew it, lightning crowned him. "The sky," he said, as if the heavens themselves had been waiting for his voice. The second stone shimmered black and silver. Hades took it without expression. "Then the underworld is mine," he murmured. The earth trembled softly, accepting his claim. The last stone was cool to the touch, translucent, and filled with motion, like frozen water that still somehow moved. It rolled toward Poseidon before anyone could speak. He picked it up. Its surface reflected not his face, but a storm, one that roared endlessly without end or beginning. "The sea," Zeus said, eyes gleaming. "You shall rule all that moves beneath the horizon." Poseidon nodded slowly, though inside him, doubt stirred like a tide. The sea was vast, yes, but unseen, unfixed. While Zeus's kingdom shone above and Hades's realm slept below, his would forever shift between light and dark, life and void. He looked down at the newborn waves. They glimmered with promise and threat. He could feel their moods already, the calm that soothed, the rage that destroyed. The ocean was alive, and it would never bow fully, not even to him. Still, he smiled, masking unease. "So be it," he said. "I will guard the waters and all that breathes within them." Yet, as the brothers sealed their oaths, the air thickened, a subtle tremor of imbalance. The cosmos itself seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to applaud or recoil. Zeus built his palace on Olympus, where wind met light. Hades descended into the deep earth, carving chambers of shadow and gem. Poseidon alone did not build immediately. He wandered the edges of continents, watching the sea claim shape under the moon's gaze. Each night, the waves crept farther inland, as if reaching for his hand. He whispered to them, testing his power, "Rise." And they rose, not wildly, but gracefully, curling into translucent walls that shimmered like glass. "Rest," he said, and they obeyed, folding back with a sigh. The sea was his, yes, but it was not owned. It was shared. It breathed when he breathed, slept when he dreamed. Still, envy gnawed quietly. When he gazed up, he saw Zeus's storms illuminating the heavens in gold and silver. The mortals who would come one day would see those lights and lift their prayers upward, not downward. Poseidon clenched his trident. "Let them pray to the sky," he murmured, "but they will live because of me. They will eat from my waters and sail upon my grace." From the shadows, Hades's laughter echoed faintly. "And when they die," he said, "they will return to me." The brothers exchanged a look, not hatred, but the weary understanding that peace among equals is only a pause between storms. Days passed, or perhaps eons. Time was still a child. Poseidon began shaping the floor of his realm. He summoned coral gardens and mountains beneath the surface, valleys where no light would ever reach. Whales, his first living creations, rose like moving continents, their songs vibrating through the dark. Each sound was a hymn to balance, to the quiet between waves. Yet, deep within him, dissatisfaction lingered. He could not help but remember how Zeus's laughter filled the air, how mortals would one day see the sky as their roof and the earth as their cradle, while his kingdom would remain unseen, beautiful but forgotten. One evening, he climbed the tallest cliff and watched lightning trace its veins across the heavens. The glow reflected on the ocean below, splitting his reflection in half, sky above, sea below. "Brother," he whispered to the wind, "why must the world look up to you but not down to me?" A voice, ancient, patient, rose from the tide. "Because the surface fears what it cannot measure." He turned, startled. There was no one, only the sea, glittering under the stars. For a moment, he thought he saw the faint outline of a woman's face upon the waves, watching him with eyes both kind and sorrowful. Then she vanished, leaving only foam. Poseidon lowered his gaze. The water mirrored him perfectly now, calm and endless. He realized that his dominion was not meant for worship, but for reflection. The sky inspired awe because it was distant. The sea demanded reverence because it was intimate. And perhaps he thought that was power enough. Still, when storms rolled across his realm, he felt the old ache, the need to be seen, to be feared, to matter. The world had been divided, but harmony remained fragile. The gods above and below would test his boundaries again and again. He raised the trident, tracing circles in the air. Thunder answered, though it belonged to Zeus. The sea churned, though it belonged to him. For a heartbeat, sky and ocean spoke the same language, and Poseidon understood the truth. They were never meant to rule separately. As dawn approached, he stood upon the surf, letting the waves touch his ankles like loyal hounds. The sea whispered promises of devotion and of rebellion. He smiled faintly. "Then let the balance hold," he said, "for now." But the ocean, like all living things, keeps no promises forever. Elsewhere, in the heart of the deep, something ancient stirred. A shadow that had survived the war, neither god nor titan, waiting to test the dominion of the new sea lord. And far above, Zeus felt the tremor ripple through his sky and frowned. The brothers' truce had been written into the bones of the world. Yet bones can break. Was peace ever meant to last among those born of rebellion? Before there were tides, there was breath. A slow inhale from the belly of the earth, and then an exhale that became the sea. Poseidon stood upon the edge of his newborn realm, watching the horizon tremble as if the world itself were taking its first breath. The sky reflected upon the surface, but beneath that mirror waited endless dark, a place where light had not yet dared to fall. He raised his trident. The weapon thrummed with quiet hunger, eager to test its domain. When the tips touched the surface, the still water rippled outward, slow at first, then faster. The ripples merged, rose, and formed the first moving wall of water. It bent light, caught the sun, and fell again with a sound no one had ever heard before. The sound of return. Thus was born the first wave. Poseidon smiled faintly. The sound was neither thunder nor song. It was something in between. The sea rolled forward again, as if it had learned its lesson. The rhythm was imperfect but alive. He felt it in his chest, echoing his own pulse. "Steady," he whispered, and the water obeyed. All around him, the ocean began to awaken. Currents spun like veins under translucent skin. Schools of small silver forms darted between them, creatures born of his imagination and the memory of movement itself. Coral sprouted in quiet colors. Plants unfolded in soft green arcs that swayed to invisible music. The god watched, awestruck, He had seen storms and lightning and the fall of titans, but this was creation that asked for nothing in return. Life without conquest, power without conflict. For a brief moment, peace felt possible. Then he heard it, a vibration beneath the calm. Deep below, something stirred. It was the same presence that had haunted his dreams since childhood. The whisper in Kronos' belly, the voice that had called him from the cave. Only now it was clearer, closer. "I remember you." Poseidon froze. The words did not come through the air. They resonated within the water, within him. He turned his gaze downward. The depths looked back. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling the surface. "You woke me when you were born," the voice replied. "You carved my body from silence. You are my child and my keeper." The ocean itself was speaking. Poseidon knelt, lowering his trident. The water rose toward him like a lover's hand. "Then teach me," he whispered. "Show me how to rule without breaking what I love." The sea answered not with words, but with motion. A spiral formed, the first current, slow and wide, pulling him gently forward. It drew him under, not to drown him, but to baptize him. The cold closed around his body. The pressure grew, and for a moment he felt weightless, both god and grain of sand. When he emerged, the world was changed. The surface now moved with rhythm, tides inhaling and exhaling, obedient to forces unseen. The moon, distant and silent, had joined the dance, its pull shaping the waters like a sculptor's hand. Poseidon looked upward and saw it glimmer, his first ally among the heavens. He smiled. "We will share this rhythm, you and I." From that day, the moon and the sea became eternal companions, one pulling, the other answering. And through their quiet conversation, the world learned time. But creation rarely comes without consequence. The birth of motion awakened things that had slept beneath chaos. In the far trenches of the sea, older beings opened their eyes, shapes without names, remnants from before the titans. They stirred, sensing a new ruler above. One of them, vast and coiled, whispered through the currents. "He thinks the sea belongs to him." Poseidon felt it, a flicker of defiance in the deep. He tightened his grip on the trident. The water around him trembled, sensing tension. "Then let them test my claim," he said softly. He struck the surface again. The sea shuddered and rose higher than before. Waves collided, broke apart, and reformed. Chaos finding its order through struggle. Lightning flashed above, answering from Zeus's domain. For an instant, the sea and sky were one, a shared pulse of power. When the storm faded, the ocean was no longer formless. It had depth, gravity, hierarchy. It knew who ruled it and what ruled him. Poseidon sank to one knee, his reflection fractured across the rippling surface. He understood the truth now. The sea was not his possession. It was a mirror of his own soul, calm when he was calm, violent when he raged. He whispered, almost prayerfully, "Then let my anger never outgrow my love." The waters stilled. In their silence, he heard faint music, the hum of coral blooming, the whisper of fish scales brushing one another, the sigh of the tides kissing new shores. The sea was learning harmony. Above, Olympus glittered faintly, unaware of the covenant taking shape below. But the world had changed forever. Rivers would flow, clouds would weep, mortals would one day drink from what began here. In this fragile balance between awe and fear, Poseidon walked along the edge of his creation, each footstep leaving ripples that turned into new coastlines. He watched the waves chase him like loyal dogs, eager, hungry for attention. For the first time he laughed, not in triumph but in relief. Yet even laughter carries weight in a divine world. The sound echoed through the sea and woke something darker still. From far below, beyond even light, came a single pulse of sound, slow, heavy, ancient. Boom! The wave that followed was enormous, swallowing the horizon. Poseidon turned, trident ready, eyes wide. But the surge did not strike him. Instead, it rolled past, spreading outward in all directions, reshaping the young continents, grinding stone into sand. It was creation's aftershock, the ocean testing its new power. When it settled, the god looked around him in silence. Islands had risen. Shorelines had curved into being. The world's boundaries were drawn not by mountains or clouds, but by him. He knelt again, running his hand through the foam. It clung to his fingers like silk. "So," he whispered, "the sea has teeth and mercy." From far within the abyss, the voice of the deep returned, softer now, like a lullaby. "Every wave you make will return to you, my son. Remember that." Poseidon closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm he had birthed, endless, circular, eternal. The first wave had come and gone, but its echo would never fade. It would carry every storm, every ship, every prayer the world would ever know. And as he stood watching the horizon, one thought refused to leave him. If a single wave could change the shape of the world, what could the next one do? When the roar of the first wave faded, the world exhaled. The sea had found its rhythm, and for a brief eternity, creation drifted in peace. Poseidon moved through his newborn realm like a painter among unfinished strokes. The water parted where he walked, revealing forests of coral glowing faintly blue, the first lanterns of the deep. He had given the ocean motion, but now it needed heart, beings to fill its silence, voices to echo its endless pulse. From the foam that curled around his ankles, he shaped life once more. Where his trident struck, light blossomed. From that light arose the Nereids, 50 daughters of grace and current, spirits woven from the laughter of waves. Their eyes mirrored the sea's moods, calm one moment, storm-dark the next. Their hair shimmered like sunlight on ripples, and their voices were lullabies that could calm whales or sink sailors into dreaming. Poseidon watched them with quiet wonder. These were not soldiers or servants. They were memory made visible, each one a piece of the ocean's soul. The Nereids circled their creator, singing a hymn that rolled through the water like silver smoke. "Father of tides, keeper of calm, we breathe where you breathe." Poseidon felt the sound travel through him, smoothing the edges of his thoughts. For the first time since the war, he felt serenity without exhaustion. "Rise," he said softly. "You are the daughters of the deep. Guard its peace and keep its stories." Thus began the court of coral, the first kingdom beneath the waves. Its palace, Aigai, rose from the seafloor in spirals of red and pearl. Columns of living coral stretched upward, crowned with glowing anemones. Schools of fish drifted through its halls like fluttering banners. The Nereids built gardens that swayed in perpetual rhythm, each petal opening and closing to the beat of the tides. Poseidon sat upon a throne carved from the shell of a giant clam, his trident resting beside him. Here, in the filtered light that shimmered down from the surface, the god who had shaken mountains learned stillness. Each morning, the Nereids brought him news of the sea, the birth of dolphins, the migration of whales, the growing wisdom of coral. The ocean was learning how to be alive. Yet peace in any realm carries its own weight. As centuries passed, Poseidon began to notice a strange quiet beneath the songs. Some Nereids swam farther and farther from the palace, drawn by curiosity toward the distant trenches where sunlight never reached. "Do not wander too deep," he warned. "The sea keeps secrets even from me, but curiosity is the tide that no god can stop." One night, a young Nereid named Galeen did not return. Her sisters searched the reefs, the kelp forests, the canyons of shadow, nothing. Only a trail of bubbles remained, each reflecting flashes of light that were not from the sun. Poseidon descended himself, his trident blazing like lightning through the dark. He reached the abyss, where the water turned cold and heavy, pressing against him like memory. There he saw movement, a shimmer vast and slow. The creature that emerged was older than the gods, a remnant of chaos shaped like a serpent of smoke. Its eyes burned with recognition. "You again," it hissed through the water. "The child who carved motion into my stillness." Poseidon's voice was steady. "You dwell in my depths. You will obey the rhythm of my realm." The serpent laughed, and the current itself bent with the sound. "The sea is not yours, little god. You are a wave that believes it owns the ocean. The words stung more than the creature's strike. For a heartbeat, Poseidon hesitated because he knew there was truth in them. The sea had existed before his crown, before his name. He was not its owner. He was its echo. The serpent lunged. Poseidon raised his trident, channeling the fury of every storm that had ever been imagined. Light tore through the darkness, coiling around the beast like chains of fire. When it thrashed, mountains trembled. When it screamed, whales miles away broke the surface in fear. Finally, with emotion both fierce and merciful, Poseidon drove the creature back into the chasm. "Sleep," he commanded, "until the sea forgets your name." The abyss sealed itself, and the water grew still once more. When he returned to Aigai, the Nereids awaited him in silence. Galene's absence hung between them like a low tide. Poseidon looked upon their faces and felt the ache of responsibility, the weight that comes when a creator realizes he cannot protect all he loves. He spoke gently. "The sea is vast because it must hold both beauty and terror. To love it is to accept both." The Nereids bowed their heads, their tears dissolving into pearls that sank to the floor, offerings to their father's truth. From that day, the court of coral became not just a kingdom of joy, but of remembrance. They built shrines to the lost, each carved from the skeletons of coral long dead, but still glowing faintly with color. The Nereid songs changed tone, no longer pure celebration, but balance. Praise woven with warning, serenity threaded with sorrow. Poseidon listened every night. Their harmonies steadied him, reminding him that divinity was not perfection, but awareness, to feel the full tide of existence without drowning in it. Still, as centuries passed, he could not ignore the emptiness beside his throne. The ocean was alive, but he was alone within it. The Nereids called him father, not equal. The waves obeyed but did not love. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and its light bled through the water in streaks of amber, Poseidon rose from his throne. "The sea has learned its song," he said quietly. "Now I must learn mine." He swam upward, breaking through the surface for the first time in ages. The world above was strange. The scent of pine, the cry of birds, the taste of wind. He looked toward the shores, where mortals would one day live, and wondered whether the ocean's ruler could ever understand the world of air. Below him, the Nereids gathered at the surface, their voices carrying one question through the waves. "Will you return, Lord of the Deep?" Poseidon gazed down at them, their faces glowing like lanterns beneath the moonlight. "Always," he promised, but promises, even divine ones, drift with the current. As he turned toward the horizon, the sea shimmered in approval, or perhaps in warning. Far to the east, another presence had begun to stir. The brilliance of Athena, goddess of wisdom, and with her, the first spark of rivalry that would test the very balance of the gods. Would wisdom calm the storm, or challenge it? When the sea at last found its voice, Olympus found its noise. The world had been divided, but division rarely ends in peace. Zeus ruled the heavens in thunderous splendor. Hades shaped the silent kingdom of the dead, and Poseidon, between them both, ruled the restless blue that touched everything yet belonged to nothing. At first there was harmony. Lightning lit the clouds, rain fed the rivers, and the rivers ran home to Poseidon's sea. But balance is fragile when pride breathes on both sides of it. One dawn, as storm clouds burned crimson above the horizon, Zeus called for his brothers. "The mortals pray," he said, his voice like a mountain cracking. "Their voices rise to the sky. They give me thanks for the rain I send." Poseidon folded his arms. "Rain falls from the clouds, yes, but where does the cloud drink from? Every drop that leaves your sky returns to me. You steal the glory of my sea." Hades smirked from the shadow he cast even in sunlight. "And both of you steal from me. Every mortal you bless with life eventually belongs to my halls." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Zeus's eyes sparked. "Careful, brother. I will not share dominion with envy." "Nor I," Poseidon replied. The air thickened, the ground trembled. Waves rose hundreds of feet high beyond the cliffs. For the first time since the war, the three powers of creation, sky, sea, and death, stood ready to collide. But the world could not survive another war of gods. The fates themselves whispered from their unseen loom, "If brothers battle, the world will drown before it is born." Poseidon felt the warning ripple through the waves. He exhaled, lowering his trident. The water obeyed his calm. "Then let us test power not with destruction, but with proof," he said. "Let the world itself decide which of us it fears or honors most." Thus began the quiet war, contests of might disguised as acts of creation. Zeus sent storms across the mountains, sculpting valleys with rain and lightning. Poseidon answered by shaking the earth until islands rose from the sea like newborn beasts. Mortals, still few and speechless, watched in awe as the brothers carved the planet through rivalry. When Zeus hurled bolts into the desert, Poseidon called rivers to bloom there. When Zeus filled the sky with eagles, Poseidon filled the depths with whales. Their competition painted existence itself. And between every clash came a strange rhythm. Storm above, tide below, each needing the other to be complete. Hades, patient as ever, simply waited. "Let them build," he whispered to the void. "Everything they raise will one day fall to me." Centuries passed in the language of elements. Yet even gods tire of contest. One evening, as lightning flashed over the wine-dark sea, Zeus descended to Poseidon's realm, his form sheathed in light. "I did not come to fight," he said. "The mortals will multiply soon. Their faith must not divide as we have." Poseidon studied his brother, the arrogance, yes, but also the weariness behind the eyes. "You fear what you cannot control," he said. "Even prayer." "I fear imbalance," Zeus answered. "The sky needs the sea to breathe, and the sea needs the sky to move. We are rivals, but we are also halves." Poseidon let the words roll through him like tide against rock. He raised a hand. The surface stilled. Clouds above mirrored it perfectly. Sky and sea, one reflection. "Then let this be our law," he said. "When you thunder, I will answer. When I stir, you will listen. Let mortals call us brothers, not enemies." Zeus nodded once. "But if you break the calm," he warned, "I will bring fire to your waves." Poseidon smiled faintly. "And if you forget your promise, I will teach the sky how to drown." The truce was sealed not in words but in weather. A single bolt of lightning struck the sea without thunder, leaving a pillar of steam that rose toward Olympus and fell back as rain, a bridge between their realms. From then on, every storm would carry that memory. Lightning kissing water, water cooling flame. For a while, the world thrived. The brothers learned distance, if not peace. But rivalry does not die. It simply sleeps until called. And envy, especially divine envy, always finds new shapes to wear. Poseidon's envy found its next form in Athens. Zeus's daughter, Athena, goddess of wisdom and craft, had begun to shape a city on the Attic plain, a place of intellect and order, untouched by the chaos of the sea. From Olympus, she looked down at Poseidon's domain and smiled, not cruelly, but knowingly. "Let mortals build where waves cannot reach," she said. Poseidon heard, and deep within, something old stirred again, the echo of that serpent's taunt. "You are a wave that believes it owns the ocean." He clenched his trident. "Then let her test my tide." But that was another contest, another story soon to unfold. For now, the brothers stood apart once more. Zeus gazing down from his golden clouds, Poseidon gazing up from his endless blue. Each pretending peace was enough to quiet the storm inside them. Above, lightning flickered like heartbeat. Below, the sea rose in silent reply. Between them hung the fragile breath of the world, balanced, trembling, waiting for whichever brother exhaled first. How long can harmony hold when the sky envies the sea, and the sea envies the sky? There is a kind of silence that only follows rivalry, the hush between storms, heavy with what hasn't yet been said. After the uneasy truce with Zeus, Poseidon wandered his shores restlessly. The sea obeyed him, yes, but worship still drifted upward to Olympus. Mortals were beginning to appear in scattered tribes, shaping clay idols and murmuring prayers to the shining sky. None looked toward the waves. Envy, small as a grain of sand, began to roll inside him. Let them see the beauty that moves beneath their feet, he thought. Let them remember the God who gives them life and takes it away. So he rose from the water and walked inland, trident dimmed so as not to shatter the newborn world. The land here smelled of resin and sun-baked stone. He felt out of place, too fluid for this stubborn ground. Yet there was promise in its emptiness. Wide plains where something swift and strong might one day run. The goddess Athena appeared on the horizon, silver-eyed and calm. Her armor shone with wisdom's quiet authority. She smiled, polite but wary. "Lord of the sea," she said, "you seek to claim the land again?" Poseidon returned her gaze. "I seek only to share its glory. Let us see who can gift the mortals better." Athena inclined her head. "A contest, then, but not of pride, of usefulness." "Usefulness?" Poseidon echoed, tasting the word like salt. "Very well." He struck the earth. The ground quivered. Cracks spread like veins. From them burst a fountain of light that hardened into shape. A creature of muscle and thunder, mane whipping like white foam. When it exhaled, dust swirled into wind. The first horse had been born. It stamped the soil, eager, half-wild. The sound of its hooves carried the rhythm of tides hitting cliffs. The mortals watching from afar gasped. Poseidon's chest swelled. He saw in the animal everything he loved about himself: strength, freedom, and the refusal to bow. "Behold," he said softly, "a gift of motion. They will cross mountains on its back. They will hear the sound of my sea even in the desert." Athena watched, impressed but unshaken. She knelt beside a patch of bare earth, pressed her fingers into the dust, and whispered words older than war. From that touch sprouted a small tree, its leaves silver-green, its trunk twisted but enduring. "The olive," she said. "It gives food, light, and peace. It endures where storms break." The horse snorted. The tree merely stood, still and steady. The mortals murmured among themselves. To their eyes, Poseidon's gift was magnificent, but Athena's was merciful. They would eat from it, warm their homes with its oil, find peace beneath its shade. The choice was made. The city would bear her name, Athens. Poseidon felt the decision like a wave crashing inward. Rage rose, but pride held it still. He looked at Athena, who met his glare without fear. "Your gift endures," he said. "Mine remembers." She inclined her head again. "Then let us both bless them. Your storms will teach them humility. My tree will teach them patience." He turned away, walking toward the coast. Behind him, the horse followed, its hooves striking sparks that became rivers. Each stride echoed his thoughts. Power contained, fury bridled. At the shore, he touched the creature's muzzle. "You are free," he whispered. "But when mortals harness you, remember whose strength you carry." The horse plunged into the surf, mane turning to foam, and vanished. Its spirit joined the tides forever, galloping beneath the waves whenever storms rise. Poseidon watched the horizon burn gold. His anger began to cool, but not disappear. The olive might outlast the horse, yet beauty rarely bows to utility. He would learn patience, if only because the sea has no choice but to wait. That night he returned to his coral palace. The Nereids sang softly, their voices weaving through the water like silver thread. He closed his eyes and listened, not for praise, but for calm. Yet even in their song he heard the hoofbeats of his creation pounding faintly through the currents. Was this defeat, or another kind of victory? Mortals would forget the contest's outcome soon enough. They would carve horses on their walls, chase them across plains, whisper his name before battle. Athena would teach them to think. He would teach them to feel. Together they would define what it meant to be human, wisdom and wildness side by side. He smiled then, faint but real. "So be it," he murmured. "Let the world choose every day between calm and motion, between olive branch and storm." Above him, lightning rippled across the clouds, answering like laughter from his brother. Below, The waves gathered rhythm again, echoing the gallop of the unseen horse. And deep within the tide, a whisper rose from the sea itself. Every gift you give, my son, returns in another form. Poseidon opened his eyes to darkness and understanding. The olive tree would feed mortals. His horses would carry them to war and to discovery alike. Both would shape destiny. Both would need each other. He turned his gaze toward the distant city that now bore Athena's name. The waves rolled gently against its shore, not in vengeance but in promise. For all his pride, the god of the sea knew this truth. Even storms must rest, and even wisdom must ride. Yet beneath the calm he felt something stir, a faint tremor traveling from the depths, older than rivalry, older even than the sea. Something that had watched all contests and waited for them to end. He gripped his trident and stared into the black horizon. The next wave was coming. Would it carry peace or retribution? The city was young, barely more than a scatter of stone huts and hopeful prayers, yet its ambition already reached the clouds. From her high temple, Athena watched the mortals shape her namesake with disciplined hands. Marble rose where once there had been dust. Olive groves spread like soft green fire across the hills. The air smelled of promise and of pride. Beneath that same sky, the sea turned darker. Poseidon stood on the rocks below the Acropolis, watching waves bruise themselves against the cliffs. The mortals had chosen wisdom over wonder. Still, they built their homes close enough to hear the tide's eternal breathing. Every night, their fires glittered in reflection on the water, teasing him. Tiny stars that refused to look his way. He spoke to the waves, low and deliberate. They live by my rain, feed on my fish, sail upon my calm. Yet their prayers climb only upward. Shall the sea not answer, too? The water stirred as though listening. Behind him, a small group of fishermen approached cautiously, drawn by the shimmer of his trident. One knelt. "Lord of the deep," he whispered. "Athena gives us trees, but it is your water that feeds them. Teach us to honor both." Poseidon's anger softened. Mortals were not the enemy. Forgetfulness was. "Then watch," he said. He drove the trident into the rock. The ground split with a sigh, and from the crack burst a column of liquid light. Clear at first, then darkening to blue, then silver. It crashed down as a fountain that hissed like a breathing beast. The mortals gasped, rushing forward with cups and clay jars. They tasted the miracle and froze. The water glittered, beautiful beyond words. But when it touched their tongues, it burned with salt. One spat it out, coughing. "It is bitter." Poseidon frowned. The spring shimmered defiantly. Every droplet mirrored his face, sharp and proud. He understood then what the sea was telling him. "I give life, but I do not bend." Athena descended from the hilltop, calm as sunrise. Her gaze took in the salt spring and the frightened mortals. "Brother," she said, "your gift reflects your nature mighty, but untamed. Mine must balance yours, or they will drown in plenty." She touched the earth beside his fountain. An olive tree rose instantly, its roots drinking from the salt without complaint, its leaves trembling like green flame. The crowd fell to its knees. Poseidon's jaw tightened. The sight of them bowing not to him but to her was a wound deeper than any sword could cut. He turned toward the sea. Behind him, thunder gathered out of habit. "So be it," he said. "Let them have their tree, but let them never forget who brings the rain that feeds it." Zeus's voice rolled from the clouds, weary but firm. "Enough, brother. The world cannot hold another feud. Rule your realm. Let hers stand." Poseidon lowered his trident slowly. The thunder faded, though lightning lingered at the horizon like a warning left unsent. He faced the mortals again. "You will build your city where land meets water. Remember me whenever the tide climbs your walls." Then he struck the ground once more. The salt spring deepened, connecting secretly with the heart of the sea. Every wave that touched Athens would carry a drop of it forever. A reminder that calm is borrowed, not owned. The fishermen bowed. One whispered, "Lord, what should we call this place where sea and wisdom meet?" Poseidon looked toward Athena. Her gray eyes held neither triumph nor pity, only understanding. "Call it Athens," she said, "but may its walls echo with the roar of the tide." Poseidon said nothing more. He stepped into the surf and let the water swallow him, the glow of his trident fading like a sinking star. Beneath the surface, the sea received him in silence. He drifted downward through corridors of light, past coral spires and sleeping whales. Around him, currents murmured approval and reproach in equal measure. "You tried to give them beauty," whispered the deep, "and gave them reflection instead." He clenched his fist. "Then let reflection teach them fear." For days or centuries, time meant little below. Storms circled the Aegean. Waves clawed at the new city's cliffs. Yet just when the waters seemed ready to consume it, they stopped. Poseidon held the tempest in check, letting spray kiss the olive leaves without breaking them. High above, Athena understood the message. "He tests, but he guards," she murmured, "as all fathers do." When the sky cleared, the Athenians celebrated both gods. They carved on their temples a relief of the contest. The goddess offering peace, the god unleashing power. Below, the salt spring continued to flow, bitter to taste, but shimmering like liquid glass. Children played beside it. Priests dipped their fingers into it before voyages, praying for safe return. Thus Athens was born not of victory but of balance. Intellect and instinct, wisdom and wonder. The city would rise on the border between reason and chaos, forever looking both to the sky and to the sea. Poseidon watched from beneath the waves, unseen. Pride still lingered, but it no longer burned. The mortals had chosen Athena's gift, but through his, they would remember humility. Every drought would send them to his shores. Every voyage would begin with a prayer cast into his depths. He would never own their devotion, but he would never be forgotten either. He smiled faintly, letting the current rock him like sleep. The salt spring above whispered his name with each ripple. "Poseidon, Poseidon." And as night fell across the new city, thunder rolled far out at sea. Not in anger, but in approval. The storm had learned patience. The god had learned restraint. Yet somewhere deep below, beyond even his kingdom's light, an old pulse answered the thunder. Slow, ancient, hungry, the serpent he had once chained stirred again, sensing the birth of mortal pride. The sea trembled. Was peace merely the pause between waves? After the salt spring's birth, Poseidon wandered the coasts in silence. The mortals of Athens had chosen wisdom. The waves had chosen him. Yet neither gift filled the emptiness that followed victory. Power without companionship is a deep current that circles itself. The sea tried to soothe him. Dolphins leapt beside his chariot. Whales sang ancient hymns. But their joy could not touch the hollow in his chest. He had built a world of motion and sound, and still he felt alone within it. Even the storms seemed to ask, "For whom do you thunder?" Then one morning, as dawn spilled molten light across the Aegean, he saw her. She danced on the horizon, where water becomes sky, a shimmer of turquoise and silver. At first he thought her a mirage born from sunlight, until the sea itself whispered her name, Amphitrite, one of the Nereids, daughter of Nereus the old man of the sea. She was beauty distilled into motion. Every turn of her body bent the waves to her rhythm. Poseidon watched, spellbound. Here was a being who belonged to the water yet moved through it freely, unburdened by command. She did not rule the sea. She belonged to it. That difference struck him like lightning. He approached slowly, the surface parting beneath his feet. "Daughter of the foam," he called, his voice gentled by awe. "The sea and I are one. Be queen beside me." Amphitrite froze. For a heartbeat, she looked at him not with fear but understanding. Then, without a word, she turned and vanished into the depths. Poseidon stood alone, waves closing over the space she had occupied. Rejection was a wound he had never known. He descended after her, but the ocean that had always obeyed him now resisted. Currents twisted, reefs rose in his path, creatures hid from his light. The sea itself protected its daughter. For days he searched, through coral forests and trenches darker than memory. Each time he thought he saw her silhouette, it dissolved into bubbles. The more he chased, the more the ocean hardened around him. At last he returned to Aigai, his palace of coral and pearl, furious and heartsick. The Nereids bowed as he entered, but their songs had turned to whispers. The sea mirrored his temper. Storms rolled endlessly, tides refused rest. The god of calm had forgotten his own rhythm. It was then that Delphinus, a small dolphin known more for kindness than courage, swam before the throne. "Lord," it said, bowing low, "the lady hides not from hatred, but from fear. She thinks to stand beside you is to lose herself." Poseidon stared at the creature, surprised. "And you? I will speak for you," Delphinus said simply. "Because she listens to the sea, and I am its smallest voice." Before Poseidon could answer, the dolphin was gone, vanishing into the darkness that had swallowed Amphitrite. Days passed. The storms quieted, replaced by an anxious calm. Then, one evening, a ripple crossed the horizon. Amphitrite rose from the water, silver hair streaming, eyes no longer afraid. Beside her swam Delphinus, exhausted but triumphant. She spoke first. "The sea told me your heart beats like its tide, fierce, then still. I will stand with you, but promise me this: you will let the ocean breathe, not command it to bow." Poseidon knelt, the trident dimming in his hands. "You are the sea's breath," he said. "Without you it dies." She smiled faintly, and the waves around them shimmered with relief. Where their hands met, foam spiraled upward, forming a crown of shells and light. Thus Amphitrite became queen, not conquered, but chosen. The sea accepted her as easily as lungs accept air. To honor Delphinus, Poseidon lifted the small dolphin into the heavens, where it became a constellation, forever leaping between stars. "Let all who look upward remember," he said, "that gentle words can calm greater storms than thunder ever could." In the days that followed, Aigai transformed. The once lonely halls filled with laughter. Amphitrite's touch softened the ocean's moods. Where Poseidon's will had ruled by force, her presence ruled by harmony. Together they balanced each other. Storm and stillness, command and compassion. They created wonders. From their union came creatures the world had never seen. Seahorses that carried the chariots of gods, coral that glowed in moonlight, shells that sang when pressed to mortal ears. Sailors yet unborn would one day hear those songs and swear they were hearing the heartbeat of the sea itself. Yet even in happiness, Poseidon felt a shadow, the memory of how easily love could slip through fingers made of power. One evening, as Amphitrite slept among drifting curtains of kelp, he rose quietly and gazed out into the open blue. Above, faint lightning danced along the clouds. He thought of Zeus and Hades, of kingdoms divided, of peace that trembled with every tide. He whispered to the waves, "Let me never cage what I love." The sea answered softly, as if Amphitrite herself spoke through it, "Then love will not cage you." At that, Poseidon smiled. For the first time, the god who shook the earth felt the world hold still around him. Not from fear, but from balance. In the centuries to come, mortals would tell stories of their union. The god who sought a queen and the queen who taught him gentleness. Temples would rise where dolphins leapt. Brides would cast shells into the surf, praying for constancy. And in every wedding song that reached the sea, a quiet echo would return, half laughter, half promise. Still, beneath even the calmest marriage, old tides linger. Deep in the trenches, the chained serpent stirred again, whispering of hunger, of jealousy, of the chaos that waits for every god who grows too peaceful. The sea shivered. Amphitrite's eyes opened. She felt the tremor even in her dreams. Love, it seemed, could teach calm but not safety. How long can a god keep the deep from remembering its rage? Peace had a sound in those days, a deep hum rolling through coral halls, broken only by the laughter of Amphitrite and the distant songs of whales. Poseidon would often drift through that harmony and think, perhaps the sea has finally learned to sleep. But the deep never truly sleeps. It only waits. Far beneath Aigai, where light dissolved into black silence, the chained serpent he had once cast into the trench began to stir. Its dreams had fermented into poison. Each heartbeat of the ocean above dripped through the rock and fed its anger. On the day of the first eclipse, when the sun and moon crossed like blades, the serpent's chains cracked. A tremor ran through every tide. Dolphins scattered, coral dimmed. Poseidon felt it instantly, a pulse that did not belong to him. He raced downward, trident blazing, through miles of water that grew colder with each stroke. The current thickened, resisting him like old guilt. When he reached the trench, he found only broken chains and the echo of laughter older than creation. Then he saw it, a cloud of black mist swirling into form, heads and arms, shapes that refused to stay whole. From that darkness crawled creatures with eyes like dying stars and skin that shimmered like oil. The sea itself recoiled as they rose. "Children of the deep," Poseidon whispered, horrified. "What are you?" They answered not with words but hunger. They were the Keto spawn, offspring of chaos, born from the serpent's rage and his own forgotten fear. The ocean had mirrored his anger back at him, sculpting it into flesh. One lunged. Poseidon struck, lightning through water. The blast turned the depths white, but for every creature destroyed, two more formed from the debris. The god of storms realized then that he could not fight the sea without wounding himself. He rose toward the surface, heart pounding. Above, the waves began to writhe, each one a shadow of the things below. Amphitrite met him at the palace gate, eyes wide. "What have you brought back from your silence?" she asked. Poseidon's answer came slow, heavy as the tide. "Not what I made, but what I denied." The monsters were his reflection. Rage unmastered, fear unspoken, and the sea was learning to speak in that language. The tremor spread through the sea like a fever. Shoals fled. Whales that had never known fear dove into darkness and did not return. From the black rift where the serpent had slept, new shapes uncoiled. Creatures half shadow, half flesh. They were not born. They were remembered by the water, echoes of every nightmare Poseidon had ever drowned. Agai shook. Amphitrite stood upon the palace steps, her hair streaming in the current. "They come for your throne," she said. "No," he answered quietly, raising his trident. "They come for me." The first swarm reached the outer gardens. Coral shattered beneath their weight, turning the water red with dust. The Nereids sang spells of calm, their voices trembling. The song slowed some of the creatures, but not enough. Poseidon stepped forward. His trident struck once, and the sea exploded into light. The shockwaves scattered the monsters, but their fragments turned to smaller beasts that slithered back together. He realized the horror of it. They were not invaders, but his own thoughts made flesh, drawn from every forgotten fury he had poured into the sea. "Then I must face myself," he murmured. He closed his eyes. The ocean responded, sensing the command that had shaped it since its birth. The currents reversed. The tides collapsed inward, dragging everything toward the trench where the darkness had begun. The weight of it crushed coral, split stone. The creatures screamed. 1,000 voices, one pain. Amphitrite reached for him. "You'll destroy your realm." Poseidon turned, and in that instant she saw both love and surrender in his eyes. Better a wounded sea than a soulless one. He drove the trident downward. A pillar of energy split the ocean floor, sealing the chasm with molten glass. The monsters howled once more and vanished, their bodies dissolving into salt and silence. The currents steadied. The sea stilled. When the light faded, Poseidon floated motionless amid drifting ash. Amphitrite swam to him, touching his hand. "You've buried them," she whispered. "No," he said. "I've buried what they were made from." Yet somewhere deep within the sealed glass, something twitched, a heartbeat waiting for the next storm. Days passed before light returned to the depths. The sea that had once glittered with song now floated in silence. The Nereids rebuilt what they could: reefs, gardens, shrines. But the water still carried a faint taste of iron, as though memory itself bled. Poseidon drifted above the sealed chasm, staring into the rippling glass. Beneath it he could see faint silhouettes, motionless but not gone. His own reflection trembled on the surface. A god whose anger had learned to build and destroy in the same breath. Amphitrite approached, her voice softer than the tide. They were not evil, only echoes. You fought your shadow, not your enemy. He nodded slowly. And shadows always return with the next light. He turned the trident, watching the metal catch stray glints from the surface. Perhaps the sea must remember its monsters, just as I must remember mine. She took his hand. Then let memory become warning, not prophecy. Poseidon exhaled. The current carried his breath through the halls of Igai, where it became a long, low hum, a sound that every creature of the sea learned to recognize. It was not command, but heartbeat. Whenever storms rose, that pulse would steady them. The deep, however, kept its secrets. In cracks along the glass, microscopic threads of darkness began to curl, harmless for now but patient. From those threads would one day rise creatures that mortals would name Kraken, Scylla, Charybdis, the memories of a god's forgotten rage. Above, the surface shimmered with sunlight. Poseidon and Amphitrite ascended toward it, the water growing warmer with each stroke. When they broke through, the horizon stretched in peace. Calm waves, gentle wind, a world reborn. He let the breeze dry his face and whispered to the sky, "Even calm owes its shape to storm." Far off, a fisherman on a tiny boat felt his net grow heavy. He looked into the sea and saw a flash of light, then only ripples. He whispered a prayer, to the god who shakes the earth but guards the deep, and cast the first offering of salt back into the water. The monsters had been buried, but their story had begun. And the god who made them finally understood. Creation and chaos share the same heartbeat. After the monsters were sealed, a stillness spread through the sea, a silence so complete it frightened even the waves. The ocean, once a choir of motion, now waited for something new to believe in. Poseidon felt it every time he moved through his realm. An emptiness shaped exactly like hope. He began to dream again, of cities that glowed beneath the surface, of mortals who could live between breath and tide. If the sea can mirror heaven, he thought, why can it not mirror earth? From those dreams came purpose. He summoned the best of his domain, coral architects, dolphin messengers, and the great whales who carried stone like mountains. Upon a wide plain where the light of the sun still reached, he laid the foundation of what would become Atlantis. At first, it was no more than a circle of luminous stone, each slab humming with energy drawn from the world's pulse. Amphitrite watched from the edge, her gaze steady. "You wish to build for mortals again?" she asked. "For both," Poseidon replied. "Let gods and men meet where sea and sky agree." He carved the city in spirals, each ring a reflection of the ocean's motion. Outer currents for defense, inner ones for peace. Towers of crystal coral rose like frozen lightning. Canals wound through them like veins of light. Above it all stood a temple whose roof shimmered with the colors of every tide. When it was finished, Poseidon called to the land, "Let there be life to fill what I have made." The earth answered with a rumble, and from the shores of the mortal world came tribes of men and women drawn by dreams of shining water. They entered the sea without fear, breathing as easily as fish. The god watched, astonished. His invitation had become prophecy. These people were unlike others. The sea did not crush them. It welcomed them. They learned to farm coral, to speak with dolphins, to build ships that glided through water and air alike. Poseidon called them Atlanteans and gave them one law: balance is the crown of wisdom. For a time, Atlantis thrived. It became the jewel of the earth, where knowledge and beauty shared the same throne. Mortals and nereids walked the same streets. At night, the entire city glowed like a constellation fallen into the deep. From Olympus, even Zeus watched with something like pride. But perfection, like calm, tempts storm. As generations passed, the Atlanteans began to forget who had given them the sea. They built statues not of Poseidon, but of themselves, faces carved in marble, hands raised as if to command the waves. Their scholars whispered, "We are gods in flesh." The first tremor came quietly. a single crack running through the temple's dome. Amphitrite saw it and warned her husband. "You gave them harmony. They make it into hunger." Poseidon frowned. "Then perhaps they must learn what hunger tastes like." He appeared before the Atlantean Council in a body of living water. "Remember the law," he said. "The sea gives because it remembers loss. You rise because something once fell." But the king of Atlantis, a man named Erathon, bowed low and answered smoothly, "Great Lord, your gift has taught us mastery. Surely the sea itself now serves us." Those words hit harder than any storm. Poseidon's reflection wavered. His image rippled with anger. "No sea serves," he said. "It endures." He withdrew to Aigai, heart heavy. Amphitrite touched his arm. "Will you destroy them?" "Not yet. The ocean teaches with patience first." He sent warnings instead. Rising tides, restless winds, nights when the moon hid its face. Some Atlanteans prayed again. Others mocked the superstition of their ancestors. And slowly, the city's balance began to tilt. Then came the night of mirrors. The sea lay perfectly still, reflecting every star. Erathon stood upon the highest tower, pride blazing in his eyes. "See," he declared, "the heavens bow to Atlantis." Poseidon heard. A single tear, salt and sorrow, fell from his eye into the water. The drop struck like a hammer. The reflection shattered. The calm broke into chaos. The ocean rose without wind, swallowing towers in silence. No thunder, no scream, only the deep reclaiming its own. The Atlanteans tried to flee in their airships of crystal, but the very light that held them aloft turned to flame. When the last ripple faded, nothing remained but drifting ruins and the echo of song. Half prayer, half apology. Poseidon stood above the sight, waves closing around his ankles. Amphitrite wept beside him. "You warned them." He nodded. "They wanted to rule the tide. Now they are the tide." He turned his trident downward. From the rubble he drew new life. Glowing fish, coral cities for creatures that would never know pride. Atlantis became myth, its truth hidden beneath miles of remembrance. "Let mortals remember the shimmer but not the fall," he said softly. "And may they fear perfection as they fear the sea." Far above, lightning blinked once, as though Zeus himself bowed to the lesson. The waves closed again, gentle now, whispering over the lost towers. Balance is the crown of wisdom. And somewhere in the calm that followed, a question lingered in the dark water. One even the god could not answer. When the sea forgives, does it ever forget? The sea forgets slowly. When mortals believe it calm, it only dreams. And when a god dreams long enough, the dream becomes punishment. Centuries after Atlantis sank, the world of men learned to sail. Their ships bit through waves like knives through silk, their songs praising not gods but their own cleverness. Of all those sailors, one name would travel farthest: Odysseus, king of Ithaca, builder of tricks and breaker of oaths. Poseidon watched him first with curiosity. A mortal who outwitted gods during the Trojan War? Even Zeus chuckled at his cunning. But the sea keeps its own pride, and pride rarely tolerates laughter. The tale began on a still morning. Odysseus and his crew rowed across Poseidon's waters, weary but triumphant after 10 years of battle. They had blinded a giant on their journey, a cyclops named Polyphemus. What the sailors did not know was that Polyphemus was Poseidon's son. When the god learned what had been done, his child left screaming on a lonely shore. "I crushed beneath mortal hands." Something ancient twisted awake in him. Not rage at pain, but the rage of memory. The echo of his own father swallowing him whole, the helplessness of being ignored by those he had once protected. He rose from the sea in silence. Storm clouds thickened without thunder. The horizon turned to iron. The sailors cheered when they saw land ahead, thinking it safety. Poseidon let them believe, for cruelty without timing is only chaos. Then the wind reversed. The first wave struck like a wall, snapping masts and sweeping half the crew into the deep. Odysseus clung to the rail, shouting prayers to any god who would listen, except the one he had offended. Poseidon's voice rolled through the storm, calm and enormous. You took sight from my blood. Now I will take direction from yours. The compass of the world spun. Islands appeared and vanished. Stars betrayed their patterns. The Odyssey had begun. Days blurred into torment. When Odysseus begged for mercy, Poseidon sent calm, only to let thirst gnaw at him beneath the blazing sun. When the king praised the stillness, Poseidon answered with whirlpools that nearly tore his ship in half. Each moment became a lesson. Respect cannot be stolen. It must be remembered. Yet even vengeance has tides. Watching the mortal fight, the god began to see something familiar. Odysseus refused to drown. Again and again he found fragments of wood, scraps of sail, faith in nothing but will. It was stubbornness that looked almost divine. From his throne beneath the coral vaults, Poseidon murmured, "He has the sea's heart," refusing to yield even when surrender would be mercy. Amphitrite heard and asked softly, "Then why punish what mirrors you?" "Because mirrors must learn what they reflect," he said. Years passed by mortal counting. Odysseus drifted from island to island, tempted by goddesses, tested by monsters, saved and cursed in equal measure. Each challenge bore the faint shape of Poseidon's hand, the whirlpool Charybdis that pulled but never fully devoured, the cliffs where Scylla struck but spared enough to teach fear. When at last the wanderer washed upon the sands of Phaeacia, Poseidon watched him crawl from the surf, thin as driftwood yet alive. The god hesitated. The punishment had run its course. The lesson had been carved into flesh. Still, forgiveness does not come easily to the ocean. He turned to leave, but the smallest voice reached him. A prayer, whispered not by Odysseus but by a child on the shore, thanking the sea for returning a stranger home. That prayer broke him, not from pity, but from understanding. The sea's purpose was not to destroy arrogance, but to remind every living thing, mortal or divine, that survival itself is sacred. Poseidon let the tide carry Odysseus the final distance to Ithaca. When the man staggered into his kingdom, none saw the god standing far offshore, watching. Amphitrite rose beside him. "Will you tell him it was mercy?" Poseidon shook his head. "Let him think it chance. Gratitude should belong to mystery." The storm dispersed. The horizon brightened. Dolphins leapt through the calmer waves, tracing patterns like laughter returning after long silence. Poseidon looked toward Olympus. "He will sing of heroes," he said quietly, "but the sea will remember him as a student." And with that, the god turned away, leaving behind a trail of silver light that mortals would later call the Milky Way's reflection on water. The final ripple of divine wrath transformed into forgiveness. The lesson remained. To defy the sea is to meet yourself, stripped of illusion. The sea is patient, but patience is not peace. After Odysseus returned home, Poseidon's name again filled mortal mouths, half in prayer, half in fear. And fear, to a god, is always a double-edged offering. The more mortals remembered him, the more their arrogance tempted them to test his mercy. Among those who forgot balance were two kings whose destinies would twist together in the foam: Theseus of Athens and Minos of Crete. Theseus, son of mortal King Aegeus, had grown proud of his lineage and louder about his heritage. Yet in secret, he knew the truth whispered by oracles. His real father was Poseidon. It was the sea's blood that pulsed through his veins, the reason waves bent for him when he sailed. At first, that knowledge humbled him. He built shrines along the coast, tossing white bulls into the surf in gratitude. But victory spoils even the grateful. After slaying the Minotaur in the labyrinth, he returned to Athens proclaiming, "No god guided my hand. I am the son of my own will." The crowd cheered. The sky darkened. Far beneath the celebration, Poseidon heard the words like thunder in reverse. The god who had once smiled upon his son now felt that familiar sting, mortals mistaking freedom for authorship. He spoke softly to the tide. "Then let him learn what my lineage truly means." That night, as Theseus sailed home, the wind died. His sails hung limp. The sea lay flat as glass. In the stillness he saw his reflection, himself doubled, unblinking. Then the reflection blinked back. A wave rose from nowhere, vast and silent. Out of it emerged a bull made of water, eyes glowing like moonfire. Charged the ship, splitting it clean in two. Theseus survived, clinging to driftwood, but every wave thereafter carried whispers. Remember your father. He would never again boast of divine blood. He had learned that the sea does not raise sons. It humbles them. Far to the south, King Minos of Crete also sought Poseidon's favor. To prove his right to rule, he prayed for a sign. A bull rising from the sea itself. Poseidon answered. A white creature emerged from the surf, perfect and radiant, its coat shining like polished marble. The god's only command was simple. Sacrifice it back to me when the time comes. But beauty intoxicates rulers faster than wine. Minos kept the bull, parading it through his streets as proof that the gods blessed him above all men. His pride birthed ruin. Poseidon turned his gaze from admiration to judgment, whispering to the forces that govern desire. The queen, Pasiphae, was struck with madness. Drawn to the bull her husband had stolen. From that blasphemy came the Minotaur, half man, half beast, a breathing symbol of broken vows. Minos hid the creature in a labyrinth, hoping walls could contain consequence. But every roar that echoed through its corridors was a prayer unanswered, a debt unpaid. Poseidon watched and waited. He knew time would deliver his justice more perfectly than wrath. When Theseus came to Crete and slew the beast, mortals cheered another triumph of man over monster. Only the sea saw the irony, that one of Poseidon's sons had killed another, each born of pride defying him in opposite ways. Years later, Minos sought to purify himself. He sailed to Greece, claiming he would capture the fugitive Daedalus who had built the labyrinth. But the true purpose of the voyage was repentance he did not understand. When his ship entered Poseidon's waters, the waves closed ranks. No storm, no lightning, just a sudden calm heavy as judgment. The crew found their king dead by dawn, his body unmarked except for a thin ring of salt around his throat, as if the ocean had kissed him farewell. In Athens, Theseus ruled wisely for a time, but his curse came differently. The same sea that had once spared him took his father. Forgetting the signal of his white sails, he returned from Crete with black ones. Aegeus, thinking his son dead, threw himself from the cliffs into the water. The sea accepted him quietly. From that day, the Aegean bore his name, a reminder that even when Poseidon forgives, the water keeps a record. Poseidon stood upon the midnight shore, gazing toward both kingdoms. 2 sons, 2 kings, he murmured. One slain by silence, the other by reflection. The sea gives each what he denies himself. Amphitrite joined him, her hand resting on his arm. Will you end the lesson? He shook his head. Lessons end only when memory fades. Mortals forget faster than the tide recedes. They walked together along the foam. Behind them the waves erased their footprints almost instantly. An act of mercy or warning, none could tell. Far off, fishermen told tales of bulls rising from the surf, of ghostly ships guided by unseen hands. Each story changed, but the moral stayed the same. The sea rewards humility and devours pride. When dawn finally came, the water turned the color of forgiveness. Dolphins played where wreckage had been. Poseidon watched the horizon and whispered to the wind, "Let their names live, but let their arrogance drown." The wind carried his voice to both shores, settling in the ears of poets who would one day sing of the gods not as tyrants, but as mirrors of human flaw. The song spread, reshaping fear into respect. For a moment, even Poseidon felt lighter, as if the sea itself had exhaled. Yet beneath the calm pulse of the waves, he sensed something stirring again, an undertow that spoke of change. The age of heroes was ending. A new age of doubt was rising. Mortals would soon question not just the gods' power, but their purpose. And when faith ebbs, even the sea grows restless. He looked once more toward Athens, then toward Crete. "If they forget me," he said quietly, "let them at least remember the lesson." The waves answered with a slow, eternal rhythm, neither promise nor threat, only truth. Because in the end, every story returns to the sea. The centuries after the fall of Crete moved through time like slow waves across sand, each one smoothing what the last had broken, each carrying the same question back to shore. For the first time since his birth, Poseidon began to wonder not what it meant to rule eternity, but what it meant to endure it. Immortality had always seemed an ocean without shore. Yet even the sea, he noticed, changed with the seasons. Coral aged, tides shifted, whales died and returned as memory in the water. The gods alone did not change, and in their stillness, something inside them withered. He traveled to the farthest edges of his realm where no current stirred. There, the ocean lay like glass, motionless, timeless. He gazed into it and saw not his reflection but absence. The surface showed neither light nor shadow, as if the sea itself refused to remember him. A shiver passed through his divine frame. From that silence rose a voice, soft, feminine, infinitely old. Why do you look for endings in a place that never ends? Poseidon turned. It was Thalassa, spirit of the primordial sea, older even than the Titans. She drifted beside him, her eyes the color of forgotten storms. You were once me, she said. All gods are echoes of older tides. Do you tire of the echo? He hesitated. I tire of being untested. Mortals rise and fall, yet their brief lives carve deeper marks than our eternities. They fear death, but that fear gives them purpose. What gives meaning to a god who cannot die? Thalassa smiled sadly. Memory. You are what the world remembers when it forgets everything else. Poseidon looked away. But memory fades too. I watched Atlantis vanish. My sons turn to dust. What remains when even remembrance dissolves? She reached out, touching the water's surface. Ripples spread, reflecting stars that were not there. What remains, she whispered, is the act of reflection itself. The sea is eternal not because it remembers, but because it keeps reflecting. The words struck him like calm thunder, soft yet undeniable. For the first time, the god of storms felt a quiet he did not wish to break. When Thalassa's form faded back into the dark, her words remained, echoing through the currents like a tide that could not turn back. Poseidon drifted upward, but the sea around him seemed different. Less a kingdom, more a mirror that asked questions instead of giving answers. Everywhere he went, he saw mortality written into the things he had created. Coral palaces crumbled and regrew in new shapes. The whales that sang to him centuries ago were gone. Yet their descendants carried the same songs, altered slightly, as though time itself hummed through them. Even immortality, he realized, borrowed its music from change. He visited the shores where mortals now thrived. Their cities had multiplied. Their ships cut across his waters like veins of light. He listened to their prayers, fewer than before and rarely his. They now prayed to harvest, to war, to love, but only sailors still whispered his name between breaths of wind. Instead of fury, he felt curiosity. From a cliff, he watched a fisherman and his son pull nets from the surf. The boy laughed each time the waves tugged against his hands. Poseidon remembered that feeling, the play between resistance and surrender, power meeting joy. The child's laughter reached him like music through water. For a brief moment, he imagined stepping onto the shore, speaking to them not as a god but as another traveler of the sea. What would they see? A myth in flesh, or merely a stranger carved from salt and wind? He almost smiled. Perhaps the difference is only time. Then the boy looked up, sensing something vast just beyond sight. He called to his father, pointing at the horizon where a faint shimmer moved, Poseidon's shadow gliding beneath the waves. The father bowed instinctively, whispering, "Thank you, Lord of the Deep." Poseidon felt the words wash over him, not as worship, but as acknowledgement, a quiet nod between beings who understood that survival is itself divine. In that instant, he realized he did not need temples to exist. He lived in every breath taken before a storm, in every prayer cast to calm a tide. The sea did not need to be eternal to be sacred. It needed only to continue. Night fell over the water like a curtain drawn slowly by invisible hands. The stars rippled on the surface, each one trembling with the faint pulse of the waves. Poseidon stood where sea met sky and let the silence speak first. He thought of his brothers. Zeus ruled lightning that burned hot and brief. Hades ruled endings that never changed. And he ruled motion itself, the endless middle between birth and death. Perhaps that was why he felt the ache of both. To move forever was to lose everything again and again, yet never follow it into rest. A shadow moved beside him, Amphitrite. She joined him without words, sensing the heaviness that even immortality could not hide. "You've watched mortals rise and fall," she said softly. "Why does their briefness trouble you?" "Because it completes them," he answered. "They burn, and in burning they give meaning to the dark. We are the dark, Amphitrite, unchanging, unending. Even love here repeats itself until it becomes echo." She touched the water. Ripples shimmered outward. But even echoes keep songs alive. The waves you send return, always different, always new. Immortality isn't stillness, husband. It's repetition with memory. Her words fell like rain into his thoughts. He watched each ripple fade, replaced by another. "Repetition with memory," he murmured. "Then perhaps the sea's curse is also its grace." He turned his gaze toward the distant shores. Mortals lit fires along the beaches, tiny stars answering the heavens above. The sight stirred him. "When they die," he whispered, "their ashes reach me. Carry them. Maybe that is how gods share immortality. Not through death, but through witness." Amphitrite smiled. "And in their stories you live as well. Every sailor who whispers your name adds another heartbeat to eternity." Poseidon raised his trident once more. Its light flared briefly, then dimmed, not from exhaustion but acceptance. The sea beneath him sighed, a single vast breath that touched every shore. "Then let me endure," he said quietly. "Not as a god untouched by time, but as the tide that remembers every life it has carried." The horizon blushed with dawn. For a moment, even the immortal sea seemed mortal enough to weep. There comes a silence that no storm can break, the silence of forgetting. For ages the names of the Olympians had rolled across the world like thunder. Altars smoked, temples gleamed, and the voices of mortals rose like surf. But time is a tide that drifts even gods toward distance. Poseidon felt it first, the way a whale feels a change in current. Subtle, certain, impossible to stop. Fewer offerings sank into his depths. Ships no longer carved his symbol into their prows. New faiths walked upon the shores, one god, many gods, no gods at all. Yet the sea remained, indifferent and eternal, reflecting each new heaven as easily as it had mirrored the old. From his throne of coral, Poseidon watched the mortal world shimmer above him like a dream dissolving at dawn. He had seen empires fall before, but this was different. The fall was not of stone, it was of memory. Amphitrite entered the hall, her light dimmer than before. "They no longer speak our names," she said. "Even the dolphins forget the hymns." Poseidon listened. The water was quieter, thinner. Where once prayers vibrated through the depths, there was now only the hum of the earth itself. "Perhaps that is how it should be," he murmured. "Mortals cannot breathe forever in the same story." She frowned. "And what are we without their story?" He rose, each step stirring small whirlpools of light. "We are what the sea was before language, movement without witness." Outside, the current shifted. In the distance, something vast drifted through the twilight water. Not monster, not god, but emptiness wearing the shape of both. The void of belief taking form. Poseidon watched it pass, its silence heavier than any roar. "When no one believes," he said, "even echoes start to starve." Amphitrite touched his arm. "Then what will you do?" He looked toward the horizon where faint shafts of light pierced the waves. "Listen," he said softly. "The sea never vanishes. It changes its name." He rose through his own kingdom, following the pull of the fading prayers. Above, moonlight spilled through the water like the last candle of a dying temple. The surface broke around him, and he found himself beneath a sky he scarcely recognized. No incense drifted from shrines. No songs named him master. Only the creak of wooden ships and the hum of distant cities that no longer feared the sea. Poseidon walked the shoreline as a man might walk through a childhood home left to ruin. Weeds grew where priests had once knelt. The marble columns of his temples stood half-buried in sand, their inscriptions worn smooth by salt and time. Mortals now came here not to worship, but to study, to measure, to map, to explain. They called his domain oceanography, and their reverence had become curiosity. At first he felt the sting of pride. Then, watching a young scholar dip her hand into the surf, he saw wonder in her eyes. Pure, wordless wonder. The same he had once seen in the first sailors who prayed for wind. The form had changed. The feeling had not. Perhaps, he thought, belief never dies. It only learns new language. He listened. The girl whispered to herself, describing tides and pressure. But in her tone he heard a hymn disguised as study. Every equation she traced in the sand was a prayer of another kind, a search for meaning beneath motion. For the first time in centuries, Poseidon smiled. The sea had not been forgotten. It had been understood. And understanding, he realized, is simply faith with its eyes open. Behind him, the waves reached forward, curling around his feet like loyal dogs. He felt their touch and answered with a gentle tremor that carried far beyond the shore. Whales in distant trenches turned toward it, remembering their ancient god. Amphitrite's voice echoed faintly through the foam. You see, even silence listens. He looked to the horizon where dawn began to bleed into gold. Then perhaps our fading is only transformation, he said. We are not lost. We are translated. The tide rose, whispering assent. Somewhere deep below, the forgotten song stirred again, not loud but steady, as if the world still breathed his name beneath its breath. When the first sunrise of that new age broke, Poseidon stood waist-deep in the surf, feeling the warmth touch his face. The light was softer than it had ever been, as though even the sun now moved with mortal restraint. He gazed inland. Cities of stone and fire shimmered in the distance. Steamships in their harbors, iron bridges stretching like threads of lightning across rivers. Mortals had mastered the elements once ruled by gods. They had taken wind and tide and bound them to wheels and wings. And yet, every ship still trembled when it met the open sea. He felt their fear, their awe, their calculations. They no longer prayed aloud, but when storms rose without warning, when compasses spun and waves lifted higher than belief, their thoughts turned instinctively toward the same ancient name. Help us. The plea reached him not as sound, but as pressure in the deep, a pulse that warmed the cold around his heart. Amphitrite appeared beside him, her form translucent in the dawn. They remember without knowing they remember, she said. Yes, Poseidon answered, and that is enough. He raised his trident one final time. Its glow was faint now, like moonlight underwater. Let the sea be their teacher, he whispered. Let every storm remind them that humility is older than knowledge. The waves responded with a slow, rhythmic bow. From horizon to horizon, the surface rippled as though nodding farewell. Dolphins leapt. The wind stilled. A moment of perfect balance. Then the god released his weapon. It sank through the layers of blue until it came to rest in the dark trench where his monsters once slept. There it pulsed softly, no longer a symbol of rule, but of continuity. Poseidon turned to Amphitrite, his voice calm. When they speak of tides, they will think of moons and gravity. But when they feel the sea, they will feel us. She smiled. Then we are not gone. No, he said, only quieter. Together they walked into the waves, their figures dissolving into light. The horizon swallowed them whole, leaving only the endless rhythm of the ocean, the heartbeat of a world that still remembered its gods, even when it believed it did not. There are silences that comfort and silences that warn. This one did both. Deep beneath the world's new noise, beneath engines, cables, and anchors, Poseidon's realm waited in stillness. The gods had faded from the memory of men, yet the sea had not faded with them. It had merely learned to whisper differently. In the blackest trenches, Light had long since died, but motion remained. A slow, patient pulse like the breathing of the earth itself. Here, Poseidon sat upon a throne of basalt and shadow, no longer radiant, no longer crowned. Around him, time drifted like silt. The ocean had become an archive of all that had ever lived, and he its last librarian. Sometimes he thought he could hear echoes from the surface. The hum of ships, the low songs of whales adjusting to their new masters, the faint static of distant storms. It all blended into something that almost resembled a lullaby. He closed his eyes. The sea pressed against him like memory. Every drop carried a story, the first wave he had ever made, the laughter of Amphitrite, the cries of Atlanteans, the shouts of sailors lost and found. Each sound was a fragment of a life that no longer needed him to exist. This, he thought, is what immortality becomes, being remembered by what no longer remembers why. He rose slowly, the weight of the water clinging to him like a second skin. Around him swam creatures that had never seen the sun. Transparent, soft, ancient. They moved without fear, for they knew the God who watched them no longer commanded storms. He was part of the current itself. A single question followed him wherever he went through that twilight world. What remains of a god when worship ends? Each tide that moved over the ruins of temples, each coral reef that grew from the bones of ships, seemed to answer. Relevance fades, but rhythm endures. Poseidon touched the ocean floor. The ground pulsed faintly, responding to his hand. The heartbeat of the sea was slow, but steady. It no longer needed his strength, only his presence. He smiled, faintly, in the darkness. Then perhaps the silence is not death, he whispered. It is rest. Ages rolled forward, each century passing like a ripple across still water. On the surface, empires rose and sank faster than tides. Men drilled into the seabed, built machines that crawled through darkness, shone lamps where once only fish of firelight had glowed. They searched for knowledge, not gods. Yet in every dive they brushed against the pulse of something they could not name. Poseidon felt their presence as tremors through his bones. When their lights cut through his realm, he did not hide. He watched them through walls of pressure, curious. Their bubbles raced upward, desperate to return to a world that could still breathe. So fragile, he thought, and still they descend. One diver, alone, slow-moving, breathing thunder through a silver mask, paused above the ancient marble of a fallen temple. His gloved hand brushed a stone etched with a trident. The mark was worn but not erased. For a heartbeat, the water brightened. The diver looked up, startled, then whispered through his radio, "There's something alive down here." Poseidon reached outward with nothing more than a thought. The currents shifted, wrapping the man in calm. He felt the mortal's pulse, quick but steady. A spark of awe flickered in that heartbeat, the same awe that had once built altars. When the diver returned to the surface, he would tell stories of light in the deep, of a presence that felt like thought itself. Scientists would measure it, debate it, name it bioluminescence. But Poseidon knew the truth. Belief was returning, drop by drop, disguised as wonder. He turned away from the ruins and swam toward the deepest point of his domain, where even sound surrendered. There he felt the earth's molten breath seep through cracks in stone, feeding new life in unseen places. Even in darkness, he whispered, creation never ceases. The realization soothed him. If mortals could forget and still rediscover the sea, then oblivion was not an ending but a rhythm, the space between remembering. He closed his eyes, letting the deep hum through him. Above, a storm rolled over the Atlantic. Below, the trenches answered with a tremor that was not destruction but recognition. The sea and its god were still awake. For a long while, Poseidon drifted through that endless hush, neither god nor ghost, but memory given form. He could no longer measure time in years or tides. He measured it in moments when the world above still touched his realm. A sunken anchor, a whale's morning song, a child's voice calling across the wind. Each was a heartbeat, proof that he was not forgotten, only unseen. One day or one eternity later, he felt something change. The current pulsed strangely, carrying warmth from above. He rose to meet it, cutting through miles of silver gloom until color returned. The ocean's surface shimmered brighter than he remembered, alive with reflections of cloud and flame. Ships crossed like migrating stars, their hulls made of metal, their wakes white as lightning. And there, at the horizon, he saw her. A little girl stood on a pier, holding a seashell to her ear. Her hair whipped in the salt wind. Her eyes were wide with wonder. "Can you hear it?" she asked the man beside her. Her father, weary from work but smiling. "It's talking." Poseidon reached through the water, not touching her, only sending a single wave, gentle, playful, brushing the pier. The girl laughed. "See? It heard me." The god's chest filled with something that felt almost mortal, joy that hurt. In that laugh he heard Amphitrite's echo, the song of Nereids, the first tide striking the world's edge. The sea was still speaking, and the child still listened. That was enough. He sank slowly back beneath the surface. The light followed him a little longer this time, stretching farther into the dark before fading. He realized he no longer feared that fade. It was the sea's way of resting. Gods too deserved rest. At the lowest point of the ocean, where the world began and would someday end, Poseidon knelt once more beside his trident. Its glow pulsed faintly, matching his heartbeat. He laid a hand upon it and whispered, "Guard them, old friend, not as ruler, just as rhythm." The weapon's light brightened for the final time. Then both the god and his sea returned to silence, not empty, but eternal. Somewhere above, another wave reached the shore, and a child laughed again. The world turned, unaware that a god had gone to sleep. Centuries layered themselves like sediment over Poseidon's silence, yet the ocean kept its rhythm, every wave repeating the name that no longer needed to be spoken. Sailors still cursed and prayed in the same breath when storms found them. Children still dropped pebbles into the tide and waited for answers that came as ripples. They did not know they were calling to him. They only knew the sea listened. That listening became its own kind of worship. In the age of machines, humans charted every current, photographed every trench, gave names to mountains he had raised before language. Satellites mapped what priests once imagined. Yet for all their precision, their instruments still faltered when the water deepened past light. There, where pressure crushed even metal, the readings flickered, tiny heartbeats of error that scientists dismissed as static. But it was not static. It was memory. Sometimes the ocean offered hints. A calm where no calm should be, a sudden hush before lightning, a blue so pure it seemed to breathe. Those moments gathered like secret prayers, forming a silent chorus beneath the noise of progress. In that chorus, the sea remembered everything. The laughter of gods, the roar of monsters, the tears of lovers parted by war. Above, the modern world moved faster, forgetting to look down. Yet every time disaster struck, flood, storm, rising tide, it was as if the planet itself whispered, "I am still here. Respect what bore you." And in those moments, when wind met wave and cities trembled, something vast stirred beneath the crust of memory. Not wrath, not revenge, recognition. The old rhythm flexed, subtle and steady, reminding the earth that the divine never truly dies. Changes pulse, hides in function, waits to be felt. The ocean had become the planet's oldest conscience, carrying the weight of every god who ever ruled and every mortal who ever prayed. And at its deepest point, where even thought moved slow, a faint glow lingered, the trident's last heartbeat, pulsing once with each turning of the world. 1,000 storms came and went, but the sea's tone never changed. It whispered rather than spoke, taught rather than punished. And though humanity thought itself alone beneath the stars, every voyage that crossed an uncharted current passed through the reach of a god's forgotten hand. In a research vessel far from any shore, a marine biologist named Elara leaned over the railing. Her instruments had just recorded an anomaly, an ancient vibration too regular to be tectonic, too alive to be chance. Came every few hours, deep and steady, like the pulse of something enormous breathing. She stood there through the night, listening, The ocean was black glass beneath a violet moon, utterly still except for that heartbeat. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She closed her eyes and felt it rather than heard it. A rhythm older than science, a sound that seemed to come from within her own chest. She smiled without knowing why. "It feels safe," she whispered. Miles below, in the trench that no light had reached for 10,000 years, a faint shimmer rippled along the seafloor, the sleeping glow of a trident stirring once in reply. Not as resurrection, but acknowledgement. The god was not waking. The sea was remembering. The next morning, Elara published her findings. An unexplained resonance emanating from the Hadal depths. Colleagues debated, dismissed, and renamed it. Yet the paper spread, inspiring songs, poems, and a quiet movement of people who began to call themselves the Tidekeepers. They spoke not of worship but of balance, urging humanity to treat the ocean as kin, not resource. Somewhere in the deep, Poseidon's essence smiled. It was not faith returning, it was understanding taking its place. Mortals had finally begun to see the sea not as chaos to conquer, but as consciousness to coexist with. The transformation was complete. Above the trench, currents danced like threads of silk. Dolphins leapt where no ships sailed, their cries echoing faintly through the water. The sound rose, gathered, and fell into silence. A silence that was no longer empty, but full. The sea remembered, and in remembering, it forgave. Centuries passed again, and the ocean kept breathing. Continents shifted, coastlines redrew themselves, and the names of cities changed as easily as the tides. Yet through it all, the water's voice remained steady, shaping memory into motion. On a distant shore, a boy stood where land fell away into mist. In his hand he held a shell, smooth and spiral, the color of moonlight. When he pressed it to his ear, he heard the sea's eternal hum. The same pulse Elara had heard, the same heartbeat that had followed every life the water ever touched. "Listen closely," his grandmother said beside him. "That's not just the ocean. That's every story it's ever told." He nodded, listening harder. The sound deepened until it became something more than noise. A rhythm like words just out of reach, an ancient syllable carried through salt and time. If he could have understood it, he would have heard a name. Poseidon. Far below, the trident's faint light flickered one final time, its glow threading upward through leagues of blue like the last note of a song fading into air. It reached the surface, touched the waves, and dissolved into daylight. The sea itself had absorbed the god completely. His memory, his temper, his compassion, all woven into its endless motion. Now every tide carried his story forward, not as myth, but as instinct. Fishermen paused before casting their nets. Sailors whispered small thanks before departure. Scientists felt reverence when the sonar failed. None of them knew why, they simply sensed that the water listened back. At twilight, when the world's noise softened and the wind stilled, the ocean's surface shone with faint lines of gold. To those who looked long enough, the pattern resembled a face, calm, vast, half-smiling. It appeared only for seconds, then sank again beneath the dark. The sea had no temples now, no hymns or offerings, needed none. Its existence was its prayer, its rhythm its remembrance. And in that rhythm, the god who once ruled it found his final form. Not thunder, not fury, but quiet continuation. The sea remembered, and because it remembered, the world endured. There is a sound the world makes when everything else grows still. It is not silence. It is the soft exhale of the sea, the echo of all things that were, and all that will be again. The story of Poseidon ends here, but the ocean he became never does. It moves through every raindrop, every heartbeat, every tear shed by those who still look toward the horizon and wonder. His storms became our challenges. His calm became our peace. And somewhere in the pull between them, life learned to listen. The gods were never meant to vanish, only to change shape. They now live in the spaces between our explanations, in the beauty that logic cannot measure. Every current, every tide, every whisper of the wind across the surface is a memory of what divine patience sounds like. Beneath the noise of modern life, that rhythm continues. Steady, ancient, forgiving. If you stand beside the water long enough, if you close your eyes and let the waves breathe for you, you might still feel him. Not as thunder, but as presence. Not as ruler, but as reminder. For the sea does not need to speak to be heard. It remembers for all of us, the rise and fall, the beginning and return. In its depths, the oldest truth endures, that strength is gentlest when it no longer needs to prove itself. And so the tide moves, endlessly, carrying with it the last traces of a god's dream, that mortals would one day find peace not in power, but in rhythm, in the quiet promise that what flows will always return. The waves withdraw now, folding the story back into their embrace. Night settles upon the surface. The stars ripple once, twice, and then fade into the reflection of sleep. If you listen closely, you will hear it still, the heartbeat of the deep. Slow, patient, eternal. And as the sea returns to stillness, may its rhythm guide your rest. For every dream begins where one wave ends, soft, weightless, infinite, until the next story calls from the depths once more.